straight into it. There was no denying it. Today was the very last day of summer. Tomorrow you were heading to class. You were excited to go back. Anxiety gnawed at your stomach. It was a bummer. Your feelings were muddled. It was a bummer. Anxiety gnawed at your stomach. You were excited to go back. You were excited to go back. Though summer had been fun, you had taken your fill, and now you were longing for fresh excitement. A new school year was full of potential. You got dressed, not if envisaging the day before you, but contemplating what lay ahead of you tomorrow. Life was sure going to be different. You had come to think of the summer vacation as the norm, but school stretched out for the majority of the year, whereas the summer vacation was just a break in the middle. So rather than it being different, it was kind of a return to the normal. What did your normal life really mean? You considered how fondly your moms talked about their summer vacations as kids. You dimly recognized that one year the pattern of school and summer itself would be over for good. It was hard to imagine. You'd gotten distracted, one arm still out of a sleeve. You pulled it through and put your mind back to the present. The season had brought about plenty of changes of its own, like Kira's visit, though that too was coming to an end today. You were happy you'd finally gotten the chance to know her. You'd become extremely fond of her. You didn't really like her. Your mind wasn't made up on how you felt about her. You didn't care one way or the other. You had become extremely fond of her. You were happy you'd gotten the chance to know her. You were happy you'd gotten the chance to know her. She was interesting to be around. You liked how easy it was to talk to her. You finished dressing, which was good. Cove would be there any moment. You'd agreed to see his mom off together. Officially, the plan was that he would come over to bring you round to his house when she was ready to set off, but you both knew that you'd be hanging out for at least a little while beforehand. Kira's visit had troubled Cove when it first happened. It had been a sudden change, thanks to Mr. Holden's infamous tendency to surprise people, but once he was able to adjust, he'd been in pretty good spirits with her around. It was a relief for everyone. You turned to your desk, where the box containing your accessories resided. You'd gone out and bought an anklet. You'd gone out and bought several anklets. Accessories reminded you of the anklet conversation. You still didn't have any yourself. You'd gone out and bought an anklet. You'd gone out and bought several anklets. You'd gone out and bought an anklet. Your eyes bored into the box. Should you wear it for Cove's visit today? You put one anklet bracelet on. Your heart pounded as you slipped the hoop through the class and fastened it in place. Would Cove spot it? Your face grew hot as you imagined how he might react. The next thought that crossed your mind was, it would only be polite to get the door for Cove. You went downstairs to wait. You couldn't wait to see Cove, so you went downstairs to meet him when he arrived. Cove knew your house well enough. You could lounge in your room to wait for him. It'd only be polite to get the door for Cove. You went downstairs to wait. You strolled down the stairs. Someone else might have been able to answer it, but he was your guest. It was only a few minutes later when the doorbell rang, as you'd chosen to stand beside it to wait for Cove. There was only no delay in pulling it open. Cove was there, just as you'd expected. Seeing you, he flashed you a bright grin. "Hi, Jamie." Hi, Cove. Come on in. Once he stepped inside, you beckoned for him to follow you upstairs. Back up in your room, you sat down on your bed and waited for Cove to settle in as you knew he would. With other guests, you might have offered them a seat, but you and Cove were long past those tentative stages of friendship. Your room was as familiar to him as his own. You watched as Cove sat down in your desk chair, his preferred spot. He rolled it closer to the bed to make it easier to chat, tweaking the angle so that he was facing you fully. Once happy with the position, he leaned in towards you, hands held in his lap. His actions weren't the ones of someone who planned on moving from his spot anytime soon, even though you had an appointment to keep together that day. When is your mom leaving? We've got some time. She's still got a shower and stuff before she goes. She didn't want me to just keep hanging around while she was doing that. He lifted his head, his gaze drifting out through the window, and chuckled. I can't believe she already's leaving, just when I'm getting used to her being there every day. He leaned back in the chair, a wry smile tickling his cheeks. Yeah, you nodded. She'll be back. Time's going by so fast. She'll be back. He cocked his head thoughtfully before shrugging. He ran a hand through his hair before shaking his head, as if shaking off the topic like a dog whipping off water following a dip in the sea. Cove looked back to you, lips parted as if he was about to speak, but instead his eyes widened and his mouth closed into a tiny frown. Something had caught his attention. Something wrapped around where the end of your leg met your foot. He cast his eyes back up to your face, then down to your ankle, and back to your face. He repeated the process once, twice more, as if struggling to hold the two items in tandem. Maybe he was weighing up whether this could be a coincidence or not. Or maybe he was just too shy to verbalize his thoughts, or was still trying to find the words, and this was the most he could manage. The intention made you feel thrilled, amused, bashful, pleased. The whole plan was for him to see you in it, and you succeeded, while his attention was still divided between your ankle and your face. It was totally on you. On his next glance back to your face, Cove saw your expression and had shifted. You watched as his bewilderment eroded into mortification as he realized that he had been caught staring. He quickly spun in the chair to face the wall instead, allowing you to glimpse the flesh that had spread all the way to his ears. He twisted in his seat, wringing his hands and determinedly avoiding looking in your direction again. It seemed that he decided against saying anything at all. Does it look good? You stayed quiet yourself. Sorry. What's the problem, Cove? Does it look good? Cove mumbled something unintelligible as he slumped lower. With how he was hunched over, the quiet words had no chance of reaching you. You weren't going to get anything out of him in this state. You waited for him to come around before speaking again. Finally, he piped up, very softly. Did you do it because of what I said before? I mean, you know, the last few words were whispered as though they were a precious secret. The ankle bracelet. Yes, no, maybe. I don't know what you're talking about. You shrugged. Yes. His eyes squeezed shut. You had no idea if the answer made him feel better or more nervous. He eventually looked down at his lap, where his fingers were flexing and curling in an awkward dance of nerves. His chest rose as he breathed deep. Well, it looks good on you. Your heart skittered in your chest like a stone skipping across water. One big leap from the unexpected compliment, followed by a series of shorter ones as you absorbed the words. You beamed at him. He was looking at you again at last, and returned the smile shyly. This really couldn't have worked out better, you thought. And there was nothing else he could add after that. The conversation lapsed into another comfortable lull. Cove swung his feet underneath the seat of the chair, eyes resting on you. Having him over here was so nice. No matter how you spent the time, you always felt better for being in his company. You couldn't help but adore him, both as a friend and in a way that plucked at your heart a vague yearning for more. Maybe it was because summer was almost over that your feelings were rushing in on you now, like high tide at the end of a long day. Summer was such a meaningful time for the two of you, not only because it was when you first met, but because it was a season that you could spend almost entirely as you pleased, and you both chose to spend it together. You wanted to let Cove know how much you liked him. You didn't know completely what you felt. You were too scared to let him know. You weren't ready to admit it to Cove now. You wanted to let Cove know how much you liked him. Now was the time. You couldn't go another day without expressing these feelings you held. You spoke words of affection. You confessed by kissing him. You asked if you could kiss him. Can I kiss you? Cove's eyebrows shot up fast enough that they could have flown off his face as a match. His mouth might have dropped off his head for how much it fell open. What? Why? He clapped his hands over his mouth, his eyebrows lowered, but expression no less terrified. Oh, no, I didn't mean, that's not how I meant it. It's not a bad idea or something, but why just say that right now? Because I want to right now. I don't know. I don't want to wait any longer. Why not? Because I want to right now. Because I don't want to wait any longer. Cove's chest began to rise and fall visibly as he swallowed short breaths in quick succession. Sorry for being weird. It's just, I kind of thought or hoped that sometime something like this might happen, with us talking about liking each other. You did? You were thinking about it before? He nodded ever so slightly. Your face felt a lot hotter after that. Cove brightened a little at your positive reaction, and his explanation continued. Could sort of picture how it might go, what it'd be like with you and me. But just the first part, I couldn't ever imagine anything that'd come after. And now it's actually happened. We're there. It's... He took another deep breath, stuttering on the exhale. This makes things different. Things don't have to be different. I pretty much imagine you'd react like this. I pretty much imagine you'd react like this. It's stupid. I feel stupid. You're not. It's a big deal, and I already knew you were gonna get nervous. He chuckled in disbelief at the situation. That was all he could do. Finally, Code drew in a deep breath. Breathe deeper than you would have thought his lungs could hold. They must have managed somehow, however, because he held it in without so much as a puff exhaled. That would have made sense if he had been about to dive underwater, but sitting in the middle of your room, it was an odd and concerning choice. Cove? Are you alright? He didn't respond. Sitting as rigidly as a statue, you were about to get up, or at least nudge the chair with your foot, when he let out the breath and took another. This one, while deep, wasn't quite as dramatic. Okay. His voice cracked on the word. The O squeaking out of followed by a dip on the second syllable. You perked up, straightening up in your seat. It wasn't clear whether it was a response to your original question or the follow-up where you'd asked if he was alright, but having him speak again was a good start. We can kiss. I want to do that. A gasp escaped you. It was okay. He wanted to kiss you. You kissed him. You were scared but kissed him, but you couldn't do it after all. You kissed him. You untangled yourself from your resting position and stood up, realizing your intent to actually go for it. Cove straightened up in the chair, his hands cooled together in his lap. As you moved towards him, you noticed his knees knocking together as he trembled. His decision not to rise from the chair made perfect sense. If he was that shaky while sitting down, there was no way he'd manage to stand without at least one of you falling over. Your legs brushed against his quivering ones as you came to a stop in front of him. Cove was staring up at you. As you leaned in towards him, he echoed the motion and drew in towards you. Once you were close enough to feel Cove's breath on your face, you closed your eyes. The last thing you saw was Cove quickly doing the same. Your lips met with Cove's for a moment. His lips were pressed tightly together, unyielding, but it was alright. You were kissing him, and he was kissing you. Your stomach somersaulted. You couldn't believe it was really happening. In that moment, it felt warm, and it felt nice, and it felt right. You drew back, and Cove slipped down into the chair, the knuckles of his hands pale after gripping so tightly. Thinking that he could do with some space to breathe figuratively and literally, you took a step back. Cove shot up, his stance rigid. Cove plastered a hand over his mouth, his eyes shut tight. His back then became bowed, shrinking him down. You could only just make out the few words he had managed to summon. Oh my god, oh my god. I can't believe we actually... His eyes flew open wide, but he didn't look your way, let alone meet your gaze. We kissed. You were full of nerves. His reaction was really cute. You thought his fluster was funny. It worried you that he was so frantic. His reaction was really cute. You watched him adoringly as he tried to gather his senses. Cove only slammed his knees closed once again. Did you like it? Was that bad? It was nice, wasn't it? Cove, it's okay. Did I do something wrong? It was nice, wasn't it? He was still holding the hand to his face, but in an attempt to answer, he emitted a muffled whimper. With that obviously not working, he uncovered his face at last, bringing the hand to lay against his chest, and looked at you. Yeah. He opened his mouth, poised to speak, and pressed his lips as words failed him. On his third or fourth attempt, you heard what he had to say. I did like it. I'm glad that we, He swallowed, seemingly not able to speak the actual word. That we kissed. Cove ducked his head, but nodded. You got the impression that he was grateful that you finished the thought, but your direct words had pierced his Achilles heel. You grinned, thrilled that the experience had been a welcome one. The smile on Cove's face was real but weary, not unlike the one he wore after a long study session, like when he'd mastered something that had previously evaded him. The work had been hard, but the reward had been worth it. With some newfound confidence, he drew himself up as he inhaled deeply. Each word he spoke next was delicate. Jamie, I like you. A lot. Probably way too much. He ducked his head bashfully and opened an eye, peeking at you through the hair that had fallen over his face like a veil. He managed to smile. Thanks for waiting for me. His eyes sparkled just looking at you, his affection transparently clear. He never could hide what he was feeling, and you couldn't be more grateful for that today. You smiled at him. You hugged him. I like you too. You breathed a sigh of relief. I like you even more. I like you even more. Cove squeaked out a nervous giggle. He curled his hand into a loose fist and brushed the knuckles idly against his cheek. Words evaded him as he opened his mouth and closed it again. I don't... He gave up on finishing the sentence, instead just smiling again. He rubbed his eyes with the heel of his hands. It was an action usually reserved for much later in the day, but at this point, it already felt like a long day. Cove then pressed a hand to his creased forehead. Does this mean I'm your boyfriend or something now? Should we tell our parents? I don't know what Dad or Mom would do. There were a lot of concerns in there. You honed in on the simplest. There was no way your moms would let you have a boyfriend, even though that word juxtaposed with Cove's name made your heart race. My parents won't let me have a boyfriend, or even a something. It's not fair. I wish we were older. It's okay. It doesn't matter though. We like each other, and that's what's important. You didn't know what to say. It doesn't matter though. Though, we like each other, and that's what's important. Nothing anybody else thought about your relationship changed what it was between the two of you. Cove lifted his hand from his chest and reached towards you, halting halfway, then slowly, cautiously hooked his fingers around yours, his palm pressed against the back of your hand. You let him hold your hand. His thumb slipped into the crook of your palm. He squeezed your hand gently. We can get it to work. We always figure things out, sooner or later. You're right. No matter what, it's okay in the end, when it's the two of us. Your forthright statement made Cove gasp, but the smile that followed and his tighter grip on your hand told you that he had appreciated it. Jamie! Cove! A sudden call from downstairs caught you both unaware. You'd nearly forgotten the world outside your room. From the guilty look on his face, Cove had done the same. Just had a call. Cove's mom is ready to go. If you're quick, she might keep the mandated motherly smothering to a minimum. You doubted that, but it was nice that Mom and Miss Priest had their strange sense of humor in common. Your eyes met Cove's wordlessly. You headed downstairs together. Each step on the way there was painfully slow, like he was trying to delay the inevitable. His whole body tensed leaving the house, and Cove froze altogether before you both could cross the street. The door's open. Dad must be taking her stuff out. He swallowed hard. She's really gonna leave. You smiled at him reassuringly. You weren't sure what to say or how else to react other than being there to support him. Cove's bottom lip quivered, and he turned away. Thanks. At that, some of the conflict warring on his face eased a bit. Together you went across the street and inside his house, finding his parents in the living room, surrounded by his mom's packed things. Hey kids. Good timing. I just called the taxi. And hi, Jamie. So glad I get to see you today. It was fabulous getting to know you this summer. I finally got to put a face to the name I've heard so many times. She winked and Cove pouted on cue over the teasing. I'm really happy I got to meet you too. Hopefully it won't be too long before we see each other again. Nodding, Kira turned her attention back to her boys. She patted Cliff on the arm with a warm smile, and then she enveloped Cove in a crushing hug. Initially, Cove squirmed to break free from her grip, but his mom was unfazed and kept him locked in place. Heartbeats later, he gave in and hugged her back tightly. And I'm so happy this trip was a success. Cliff looked like he was bursting with pride. Well, not a 100% success, but still a passing grade, I think. Thinking back on everything that happened this summer, he started to look sheepish. Cliff scratched the side of his head, and an awkward chuckle escaped Cove. There were ways it could have gone smoother. I'm still keeping that in mind for the future. Good for you, Cliff, and I'll be trying harder to stay more in the loop. You watched as Cove smiled softly at both of his parents, and you felt relieved seeing how much the whole family had come together since you first met them. Despite any underlying troubles, love was still there. After that, it wasn't long before the taxi arrived, rolling up in front of the house, and in clear view of the open door, Kira stood up, smiling sadly. Well, that's my ride. Yeah. The matching reply got a chuckle out of Kira as you all filed out of the house. Father and son went with Kira's bags in hand. Once outside, you spotted your family waiting by the street, and to your surprise, Derek was also with them. He stood uncomfortably, and he waved as soon as you noticed him. Hey, Jamie! Hi, Cove! When did you get here? My dad dropped me off just a little bit ago. Thought I could visit one more time before school started. You picked a busy day. Busy time, sorry. Derek couldn't even look at Cove. He nervously Sorry, my phone's going off. Hate it when it does that. Derek couldn't even look at Cove. He nervously kept rolling a pebble with the bottom of his shoe. I wasn't even thinking that your mom would be leaving today. I'm sorry, dude. What? You're not interrupting anything. You're always welcome here. It would have been sad if I didn't get to say goodbye before leaving. Derek came to hang out often, so it was inevitable that the two had met at some point this season. I think so too. It was apparent Derek would have preferred to have gotten there at a more opportune moment. He never liked seeming impolite, but their reassuring words soothed his worries. The tension he was holding in his body lessened, and he looked like he was feeling much more like himself. Bye, Derek. It was fun getting to know you. Bye, ma'am. Is there anything I can do to help? Nah. Don't worry yourself over that. We're just about set. In that short amount of time, Cliff had gathered and packed the bags into the trunk. Kira took one last look at everyone and sighed. All right. I don't want to keep the driver waiting. It's time to head out. The little crowd that had formed around started their chorus of farewells and well wishes traveling, but Kira still made no move to get into the taxi. She placed her attention on Cove. I'll call when I get to the airport and when I make it to Nevada. Also, you better call the moment you walk in the door at home. Otherwise, we will be wondering all night if you got into trouble on the way there. I can do that. I'm just going to turn my phone on silent. And could you call tomorrow too, so I can tell you how school went? Of course. I want to hear all about it. Kira put a hand on Cove's head and affectionately ruffled his hair one last time. She then let go, only to move on to squeezing his cheeks in her hands instead. Mom! I love you so much, baby. She was chuckling by the time she freed him and rounded things off with a small tap to the tip of his nose. Cove rubbed at his face with a grin. Finally, she walked to the car while waving and took her seat in the taxi. Cliff hooked an arm around Cove's shoulder and kept him close as he began to pull away. For a moment, Cove looked up at his dad and then wrapped an arm across his back. Bye, Mom. Bye. Travel safe. Kira rolled down the window and stuck her head out of it. She waved again while blowing kisses at Cove and Cliff. See you again. Before she was out of sight, you decided to call out with your family and hers. As you added your voice to the others, you watched Kira's smile grow larger. The cab turned down another road and completely disappeared from view. Cove let go of his dad and took a few steps out into the empty street, still looking in the direction of his mom. Mom went. He smiled quietly, deep in thought. You got the impression Cove was feeling better than he was earlier. He was finally content with the way things were. You jumped a bit when your mom put a hand on your shoulder, pulling you away from your thoughts. She smiled when you looked at her. This was a great vacation, huh? Yeah, I don't think so. You nodded in agreement. You shrugged. I don't know. Summer isn't over until the second I fall asleep. No naps for you then. Can't risk you accidentally ending summer a few hours too early for the rest of us. Chuckling, you shook your head, amused. Cole walked back over to the group, still genuinely happy. Derek grinned at him welcomingly, and everyone else there smiled at him, even Elizabeth. Well, Ma clapped her hands together, bringing everyone's attention back to the present. It's almost lunchtime. I think I'll put something special together. Her eyes sparkled with a plan, and Mom smiled. I bet you could use some help with that. That'd be absolutely wonderful. Derek glanced between the two, his eyebrows furrowed. Is there something I could do? Your mom's exchanged a fond expression. Ma shook her head. That's very sweet, Derek, but it's alright. It's not your job. Technically, your dad left you under Cliff's watch. You're meant to be taken care of by him, not doing chores for the neighbors. Mom laughed a little over her own joke. You watched Derek look away, discouraged. It's okay. I don't mind. He was a little bashful about it. You wondered if Mom's joke had just reminded him that he wasn't initially meant to be invited to lunch. It was getting a little awkward. Mom grinned sympathetically. Her comment was meant to lighten the mood, not bring it down. Mom tried again to get things moving forward. Why don't you kids go have fun? You all can come back in about an hour, and we'll make enough for everyone. Mom nodded in agreement. Another stunning idea, Lonnie. Thanks. Yeah, thank you. That sounds like a plan, then. I don't want to cramp your style. I've got some stuff to work on, so I can be out of your hair this afternoon. You should come by later, too. No reason you should be the odd man out. Mom seemed amused as Cliff rubbed his neck nervously. He grinned a wavering but pleased smile. I appreciate the invite. He looked over the assembled crowd with knowing glances. I can help too. With as many people as you're feeding, that's going to be a lot of food. Didn't you hear what we told Derek? It wouldn't be fair to make you cook when we're the ones who are inviting you in. Mom raised an eyebrow when Cliff waved it off. I insist. Derek will be missing time with his pals. This would be a break for me. I'm quite the chef. Ma and Mom exchanged further glances before Mom shrugged. An airtight argument. If you're sure, we'll be happy to have you, Chef Cliff. Cliff's grin widened and seemed more hyped than you'd expect him to be about helping with lunch. Ko shook his head, a fond smile on his face. Then all us grown-up people will be heading inside. I assume the rest of you kiddos are staying out. Maybe not all of them. Ma tilted her head, a silent question for Elizabeth. Your sister thought for a moment. I'll stay with the kids. That's great. Both your moms smiled at her, while Derek and Ko didn't seem to appreciate her phrasing. But with the plan decided, all three parents waved and headed for the house. It was just you teenagers now. Elizabeth looked at you and the others, a curious expression on her face. So, what now? You silently wondered if Elizabeth only stayed out with you to avoid getting roped into work. Then again, she could just genuinely want to hang out. You couldn't tell with your sister. Ko spoke up after no one else did to answer Elizabeth's question. Want to go down to the shopping street? It's been a while, and I don't think there's a lot of other things we could agree on. Yeah, sure. Sounds awesome to me. Unlike you guys, I haven't been there 1,001 times. It's new to me. Let's do it. We strolled across the road as a group down to the beach and then to the left. It took less than 15 minutes to arrive, one of the conveniences of Sunset Bird. The four of you looked around at the familiar shops, trying to see if anything caught your attention this time. Derek was the most enthusiastic. He checked out every stall with his eyes wide with wonder. Elizabeth and Cove were in good spirits as well. That's so cool! He ran over to a street magician who was currently doing a card trick for a group of enchanted tourists. Derek clapped when the magician showed a middle-aged man his card. Derek turned back to the group with a curious gleam on his face. What does it take to perform here, anyway? Do you have to ask somebody, or do you just show up and start doing stuff? Who would you even ask? It's a public street. Hey, Miss Mayor, can I pull a rabbit out of my hat? Please? Flopsy is well behaved, I promise. Derek chuckled, his eyes searching up and down the scene. Maybe there's a boss of the shopping street. No one does any of this around my neighborhood. It's just regular stores behind walls. It's different if someone wants a real store, but here I'm pretty sure people are just putting on their little shows whenever they want and do whatever. That's so neat. Would we be allowed to do something too? Cove laughed and Derek began almost vibrating with excitement. Elizabeth rolled her eyes. What would we do? Well, I don't know what. Not yet. I mean, I just found out it's a possibility, you know. But there's gotta be something. We know cool stuff. I'm sure if we think about it, we could plan a show that really get a crowd pumped. You thought it was a great idea and wanted to be a part of it. You felt he could try this idea on his own. You thought Derek needed to abandon that idea. Stat. You gave a look to the other two. You thought it was a great idea and wanted to be a part of it. I'm in. Woo! I knew I could count on you. Now we just need the act. It'll come to us. Right. With some amusement, the gang continued to pursue the stalls. Elizabeth found some earrings with a dangling, badly misprinted globe that everyone laughed at. Cove picked out a blob as Iceland, but Derek thought that it had to be Greenland. You know, this is a world with what looks like 9 continents. I think you're both wrong. You want to decide with Cove. It looks like Iceland to me. Right? Suddenly, Cove froze. You stared at him and then tried to see what caught his attention. When you saw a familiar face down the way, it all made sense. Between the crowds, his bright hair stood out like a neon green bowl in a kitchen sink. It was Jeremy. Jeremy slowly drifted his eyes down the street, and his eyes widened in mutual recognition. He definitely noticed you. Derek frowned. And Cove sighed. Neither of them were happy to see him again. You didn't want to even start with Jeremy's shenanigans today. Elizabeth raised an eyebrow. Her gaze swept over Jeremy without a hint of a clue. Jeremy simply scoffed to himself and waded deeper into the crowd of people. Derek relaxed and exhaled loudly. I'm glad he's not going to start anything. He peeked over at Elizabeth with a tiny smirk. See? That was the mean kid. Huh? She still didn't get it. That first summer day hadn't made nearly as much of an impression on her as it did for Derek, but he smiled and waved it off. Just forget about him. I already have. He laughed and co-smiled lightly. He seemed in a much better mood now that Jeremy was gone. Your eyes wandered over to where Jeremy disappeared. You hadn't forgotten the day you met him either. He was only going to be in town for a vacation with the parents he hated. That glimpse was probably the last time you would ever see him. You mentioned that realization to everyone. Jeremy's probably gone for good now. It's time for him to go back to wherever he's from. Yeah, guess we won't have to worry about that guy anymore. Derek kicked at a little rock in the road. It clattered forward and then rolled under a stall. But I still think it's kind of sad Jeremy turned out to be, well, like he is. It would have been nice to make another friend. Cove shook his head. He was clearly not broken up over what might have been. Good riddance. Elizabeth rolled her eyes at the strange farewell to the odd boy, not interested in the slightest. She clearly didn't understand his impact, and at this point, she didn't want to understand. You couldn't help but wonder, though, what would have happened if you would have interacted with Jeremy more. You were glad that you wouldn't find out. Jeremy was unlike anyone you had ever met before. You thought he was horrible. You thought he was weird. You thought he was stupid. You thought he was kind of pitiful. You thought he was kind of okay. You didn't know what to think about him. You thought he was kind of pitiful. You and the group moved on from the stall and from Jeremy. It didn't take long for everyone to return to the joking. You all enjoyed what little time you had left. As Elizabeth mentioned, the hour was almost up. The little trip had flown by, and lunch must have been waiting for you now. Derek bounced on the balls of his feet. Come on, guys. Let's get going so we can eat. I'm starving. If we have to. I can't wait. Phew, I've had enough walking around. Homebound, here we go. You nodded silently. Phew, I've had enough walking around. Cove stretched one of his arms lazily. Let's go then. You looked at him appraisingly. You asked Cove to carry you back to the house. Hey, Cove? Yeah? Could you carry me back home? What? Cove turned red, obviously flustered. You explained you wanted a piggyback ride. You didn't want to walk back. You told him it was a special occasion. You decided to let it go. You explained you wanted a piggyback ride. I want a piggyback ride, and you're the only one big enough to give me one. Cole sighed and shook his head. Elizabeth and Derek became a chorus of laughter. Come on, Cole. It'll be fun. Alright. Cole stepped over to you. He looked like he couldn't believe what he was doing. Your lips quirked into a large smile. Aw, yay! Thanks. He carefully crouched down in front of you so that you could climb on. It took a little bit of clambering to get yourself completely up on Cole's back. However, when Cole slipped his arms under your legs and stood up, you felt very secure. Elizabeth walked with a smirk on her face, while Derek laughed even harder. It was fair to say that your antics were entertaining. You were glad Cole went with it. Cole carried you home, but he seemed pretty bashful about the situation. He struggled with how much to grip around you and whether or not he should try to reposition things. But along with all that, he also seemed to feel some pride to be carrying you. It was a pleasant walk home, and in no time you had made it back. Derek got at the front door and held it open for everyone as each moseyed inside. The three parents were still in the kitchen. They looked up and waved. Welcome back, everyone. You made it just in time. I hope you're hungry. When Cole had brought you inside, the parents couldn't help but notice the odd conveyance. Your moms were unsure, and Mr. Holden raised an eyebrow. Did you pull something, Jamie? I'm okay. Aw, Cove, you've gotten so strong. And reliable, too. What a guy. Cove rolled his eyes at the commentary and started walking to your couch. He bent down and you let yourself plop back on the couch. Thanks for the lift. Cove exhaled loudly and shook out his arms. He just seemed relieved that he made it. So, did everyone have a nice time out? She gestured for people to take a seat at the table. Plates and silverware have already been placed out. You took your normal seat. Elizabeth sat across from you, and Derek took the seat to your left. Cove sat on your right. But he blushed a little and began fidgeting with his silverware. His dad was the first to pick up on his extra awkwardness, but your moms weren't far behind. The parents shared looks at Cove's reaction. It seemed that he was struggling with how to act normal around his dad or your parents, or both, after what happened between the two of you upstairs. Oh, yeah, we had a great time. It was fine. I had fun. I really liked it. That's good in my book. Casually, Mr. Holden sat in the empty seat across from Cove. He smiled at you and all the other kids. Mom set down a platter full of water, glasses on the table. She looked down at the gathering. It's a good thing we have 8 chairs. I can't remember the last time we had a group this big over for a meal. Can you pass the drinks down to the other side? Make sure you all get one. Sure. Those close to the cups obliged and started offering waters around. As you passed Cove his drink, your hands touched. Cove froze. You had already let go, not yet realizing that he was too distracted to function in that moment. The glass fell down to the table, landing with the sharp clatter of glass on wood. Cove scooted his chair back with a restrained shout. I'm sorry. I'll just get a towel or something. He looked around in a frantic panic, as if an object to soak up the water would magically appear if he turned his head fast enough. His dad bit his lip in a worry, rising from his own seat. Cove, what's going on? You've been a little out of it today. Did something happen? Cove tensed, frozen again. He stared at the water on the tabletop as if he wanted to sink into it. You spoke up to cover Cove. You blanked on anything that could be said. You admitted what happened between the two of you. They had to find out sometime. Well, Cove and me kissed earlier. You let the truth spill like the water before. Cove gasped and his hands shot up to cover his quickly darkening face. It was silent as everyone processed. Silent. Ha! Both Mom and Ma started to laugh, and that snapped people out of their surprise. Mr. Holden slapped a hand over Cove's shoulder. Congrats! Cove flinched at the touch, but still said nothing. His hands might have well been glued to his head. Elizabeth shook her head, and you can hear her, "Can you believe this?" line in the motion. He really is your special boy. He really is your special boy. Derek grinned at you. And Cove, even if he couldn't see, he at least was happy for you. Now I'm sure we all knew this was coming sooner or later. I had hoped you could have waited a couple more years, but what can you do? It's a wonderful thing that you both like each other, but Mom is right that you're both young. We'll just have to chaperone you if you ever want to go on dates. I'd be happy to help with that too, whenever it's needed. Cove creakily fell back in his seat. His hands hadn't moved, while his expression was unreadable. The color of his skin had reached extreme red. He crashed forward, his head smushed to the table surface, somehow curling up even more from his embarrassment. Is it that still wet? No response was given, at least with his hands there. His face should have been somewhat protected from the water. You were also feeling extremely embarrassed. You felt bad for putting him in this situation. You started to shrink inwards yourself, feeling a hot blush on your cheeks. This was bad. The parents laughed more, all three of them, with wide beaming grins on their faces. Our families are truly uniting now, then. This will be the Holden-Thompson clan's first meal together, or Thompson-Holden clan. I'm not sure which has a better ring to it. Derek's eyes were wide, and he kept shooting furtive looks at the door. Apparently, the grown-ups were making this too much for even him. He seemed to be one of the few people concerned for Cove's impression of a withdrawn red-eared slider turtle. You good, bro? Derek whispered encouragingly to his flattened friend. Meanwhile, Elizabeth was still unimpressed. And then finally, you heard a squeak. It was Cove. Please, can we please not talk about this anymore? Please. Oh, sure. I think that's enough for now. We've still got to eat lunch after all. Food was placed on the table and Derek started to fill his plate. With the others following suit, Cove sighed quietly as lunch started up in earnest. Mr. Holden gave his son another pat on the back. Cove slowly straightened it back up, and you helped him get a towel and clean the water dripping everywhere at this point. You caught eyes with him and tried to gauge if he was unhappy with you because of this. Thankfully, he gave no impression of that. The affection he showed back in your room was strong as ever. As everything got set up, Ma chided Elizabeth to take her elbows off the table. And you shouldn't slouch. She pointed to Mr. Holden, who was leaning forward with both arms on the table. Oops. Mr. Holden seemed unsure about all the sudden attention and carefully rearranging his posture to something suitable for a fancy dinner. He smiled sheepishly again at Ma. Elizabeth rolled her eyes, and Ma gave a level look at her. You shouldn't be impolite to a guest in the house either. Elizabeth groaned. Long suffering. Ma giggled, and Mr. Holden chuckled. The lot of you could learn a thing or two from Derek. He has the best manners here. Derek blushed, but it was true. His posture was upright and formal. He even held his fork gracefully. His table manners, on top of all his attempts to aid your parents, made the model of meal attendee behavior. It's nothing. It's true, though. You have been a lovely guest. I've noticed that, too. It's always nice when you stay over, Derek. Derek smiled and sat a little taller in his chair. And do you have anything good to say about our other guest? She looked deliberately at Cove with a teasing smirk. Or is there just nothing to say? Well, Cove is my number one, but he does still clean his hands by wiping them on his pants. Cove frowned at that and absent-mindedly brushed his hands on his pants' legs. Your mom's laughed lightly. Elizabeth, you should know, after all these years, Cove is hardly a guest anymore. Cove smiled awkwardly. Thanks. Manners. Who cares? I don't think it's that big of a deal. You teased Cove for his bad habit. You complimented Derek on his politeness. You joked that Derek was basically an adult. You kept quiet and took a bite of food. The parents had made an excellent lunch. You took another bite and minded your business. Everyone ate their meal together and continued to hang out for the afternoon. After the food, you and the others played a couple games and talked about plans for the upcoming year. The time passed by quickly, and soon it was time to part ways. Mr. Holden talked to your moms, and Cove drifted over to you, knowing that as soon as his dad finished up, he would be leaving. It'd be cool to stay, but we have some stuff to do before everything closes today. Yeah, bye. Could you move? I need the phone. Cove raised an eyebrow and Elizabeth impatiently gestured behind him. Cove realized he was standing right in front of where the receiver was. He sidestepped out of the way and shook his head, clearly thinking Elizabeth was rushing too much. Your sister made a beeline for the phone and started dialing the number of what you figured was one of her friends. Knowing Elizabeth, she was going to be on there for a while. You, Cove, and Derek shuffled closer to the door. It seemed like Mr. Holden was wrapping up his conversation, so everyone started saying their various farewells. See you later, Cove. We gotta do this again sometime. Yeah, see you. Cove turned to you and smiled slightly. Bye, Jamie. You hugged Cove goodbye. You patted Cove on the back. You nudged Cove's shoulder. You ruffled Cove's hair. You hugged Cove goodbye. You stepped forward and spread your arms wide. Cove only had a moment to react before you encircled him in your arms. Cove hugged you back tightly, and his chest rumbled as he laughed. His cheeks were slightly red, especially when he looked over and noticed that Derek had watched the whole thing. Derek smiled amusedly. Seriously, dude, we'll have to hang out later. I'm gonna miss you during school. He punched Cove's arm softly. Cove still rubbed the spot afterwards. Cove and his dad left soon after that. Your parents started cleaning up the house, and Elizabeth was still chatting to her friends on the phone. It was just you and Derek left. He elected to stay outside in front of the house to wait for his dad to pick him up. You decided to keep your guest company, although he was originally Cove's visitor. A light summer breeze blew through your hair, and Derek shifted his weight from foot to foot. Thanks for waiting with me. He kicked at the ground distractedly. Dad's still gonna be a while, so do you want to go for a walk? Sure, I don't mind. The two of you walked down the street again, just wandering without a destination plan. It was a quiet stroll, too quiet for Derek being the company. You turned to him when you had noticed that he wasn't saying a word. That was unusual. Derek always had something he could chat about. You weren't sure if you should ask about it. Somehow you ended up at the old park near the beach. You glanced over to Derek once more, still expecting him to say something any second now. However, nothing came from him. In fact, now you noticed a frown creeping on his face. Derek smiled when he realized you were watching. At least his mouth was turned up. There wasn't anything that really felt happy in the expression. He turned away, and the smile fell off his face. His eyes stared intently at the ground, and you raised an eyebrow. Is everything okay? If you want to talk about something, I'm here. Derek, what's going on? You kept quiet. If you want to talk about something, I'm here. I'm a little sad. It's just, with school starting back up again, it's going to be harder to visit. I'm going to have homework, and clubs, and practices, everything else. It really sucks we go to different schools. His face screwed up and his fists were closed tightly together. This was really concerning him. What if we don't have time? You channeled some optimism into the conversation. We'll make time. We can talk over the phone and have plans for weekends. It'll be okay. Derek looked up at the sky. It was orange and purple, with little wisps of clouds scattered around. A plane flew high, with a jet stream trailing behind it. I hope we'll always be friends, no matter what. Even if we don't see each other for a long time, or if we get really busy, I still hope. He cut himself off and met your eyes. There was something serious to him, sincerely worried that you'd fall out of friendship. I hope so too. I want us to be friends forever. I hope so too. I want us to be friends forever. Derek smiled, mostly to himself. He seemed a little more like the usual. Then for sure, we have to make the most of next year. Then the year after that, and the year after that. He rambled on for a while about things. We'll just make the most of every year. Right. You smiled and felt like your friendship was still strong. You didn't spend much longer at the park after that. Derek didn't want to miss his dad, so you both made your way back to your street. After Derek went back home, you decided to settle in for the night. Stretching your arms over your head, you noticed that the living room and the phone were free. You took it easy. You called Lee. You picked up the receiver and quickly punched in the familiar number while going to take a seat on the couch. Soon enough, after explaining the situation to the housekeeper, Lee answered. Hey! Hi, Lee. Can you talk? Definitely. We practically have to. My gosh, can you believe it? It's almost time for school to start. What happened to our summer? School starts first thing tomorrow for me. Ew, and I thought starting next week was bad enough. Enjoy your last week. Oh, I will. I hope you'll survive your first day. I'm looking forward to it. Then I have nothing to worry about. You'll have a better chance at surviving. And at least summer was a nice while it lasted, right? We were busy. Yeah. Finally, you thought about all the best memories you made this summer. Lee was there for some, but there were still many you hadn't filled her in on yet. You reminisced about a moment of your summer. You began to speak about the road trip you took. That one day with the big shopping trip in the morning. That time you went to Cove's house for dinner. That incredible hot afternoon. I went on a vacation. Cove's parents ended up inviting my whole family on an RV road trip. Whoa, that's awesome! It was a 3-day trip, and we visited the Redwood National Forest. Lucky! It was fun hanging out with everyone all together. I really liked riding in the RV for the first time. Clove was flirting with me on the trip. Cove did what? He tried to flirt. I was surprised too. Ah! I'm so happy for you. You have to keep me updated on what happens next. It was hard to focus on what she was saying. Your face was probably red right now, just thinking about what happened. That time you went to Cove's house for dinner. One night, Cove's parents invited me over for dinner at their house. For the first time, Mr. Holden made Mexican food. I told Cove about his dad offering to pay me to be his friend. You had really confided to Lee about the money in the past. That sounds dramatic. It really was. It's good that you finally told him about it. I'm glad it's not a secret anymore. There was this day that Mom and Ma took me and Elizabeth on a big supply shopping trip. What made that so memorable? Lee chuckled, but you could hear the curiosity in her voice. I went surfing with Cove later. Ooh, that's super cool. It was so fun. I remember the hottest day this summer. I could barely do anything and had to stay inside the entire afternoon. I learned more about my moms though. My parents acted really embarrassing the whole time. Cole was so hot at his house, he bummed around at mine all day. Cove came over and we made sandwiches together. Cove said I was cute. Well, he wrote it. We were playing Hangman, and that's what he picked for me to figure out. You heard her audibly gasp. That's such a move. What did you do? You filled her in as much as you were willing, and she gratefully took in all the details. Talking to you is always the best part of my summer. Even though it was a phone call, you just knew that Lee was winking at you. Alright, okay, so a high point for me was when I took that trip with my parents to Europe. That was amazing. You and Lee continued to go over your adventures until you both were yawning to each other over the phone. Before you go, there's one other thing. I told Cove I had a crush on him today. Before you go, there's one other thing. I kissed Cove today. There was a pause of silence. Knowing your cousin, you decided to pull your ear away from the phone. As expected, a screech, loud enough for you to still make out clearly from a distance, crackled through the speaker. When you felt it was safe, you put the phone back against your head. Lee was still gushing to herself, though a little less loudly. Why didn't you say so sooner? He had to have kissed you back, right? You two are the most perfect pair ever. Tell me, please. You used the precious little time you had left to try filling her in as best you were capable of in that moment. But soon the approach of curfew became too much for you to ignore, despite how excited the both of you were. At that, you decided it was time to say goodbye for now. You did have school to wake up for in the morning. Bye, Lee. Night, Jamie. Talk to you later. You left the phone on the side table for now. Looking at the clock on the wall, you saw that there was only about 10 minutes until your moms would be insisting you had to go to bed so you could be rested enough for school. You stretched your legs out on the couch and sighed in defeat, watching the minute hand change 1 minute closer to bedtime. You rearranged yourself, feeling restless, and looked out the window. Startled initially, you spotted a figure out in the hills. It was Cove. When the surprise faded, you realized it really wasn't that much of a shock at all. It was exactly something Cove would do. You went outside to meet up with him. You ran off to go see him. You left him alone. You smacked the window to get his attention. You opened the window to call out to him. Strolling casually, you went over to the front door. When you arrived, you noticed how many fireflies were out that night. They drifted along lazily, barely minding your presence as you waded through to reach the top of the hill. Cove turned towards you as you approached, and you noticed right away that Cove looked happy to see you. Hey! You had a bounce in your step. You weren't sure how long you'd get before your moms roped you back inside for bed. Hey, what are you doing out here? Nothing. Not really. He shrugged, seeming unhappy with his own answer. You stared at him, waiting for him to continue. Well, I guess I was feeling kind of weird about stuff, so I'm getting some fresh air before bed. I know how you feel. It's hard to stay still. Tomorrow is going to be the start of a new year. At the mention of school, a small noise escaped him. Ko let himself fall back onto his butt and then all the way down. So he was laying on his back. He looked up at the sky. You laid down yourself. You lowered yourself to lay back on the hill. He had been lost in thought, or was possibly waiting for you to situate yourself, but he started speaking unprompted again. Thanks for telling me about my dad, and the money he offered you to be my friend. This was probably the last thing you were expecting out of him. Ko seemed to pick up on that and stretched his arms out wide in front of him. This is where we met. Remember? It happened that day. You could recall the sad little boy with a pink cast who you found in this very spot. It felt like a lifetime ago. I kind of have a strange feeling looking at you. Not in a bad way. Just thinking about you then and really seeing you now. It's something. He turned his face away from you. You got the impression he was trying to hide a blush. It was almost unbelievable how much of an impact he made on your life just by moving in next door. You couldn't even imagine what your days might have looked like in a world where you hadn't met him. Ko glanced back at you, waiting for a response, and you had no idea what to say. Ko just stared at you unblinkingly. What? It's you. Huh? He snickered before answering. He looked thoroughly amused with your reaction. That's what you do all the time. So I'm being you. There was no response to that you could give, but you noticed Ko smiling softly at you. He wasn't trying to be mean with it. Honestly, there weren't many people you could think of who could tease you about something like that. Turning a smile, you realized there was no denying that you two have been around each other for a long time. Ko broke the quiet before it could fully settle. Hey. I'll see you tomorrow. Yeah, see you then. With a final wave, Ko headed for home, but you stayed there a few minutes longer. Your mind kept going back to his simple statement. See you tomorrow. No matter how much was changing around you, there were some things in your life that always seemed to remain true. The hills felt warm to you that night. Before you knew it, you were getting comfortable under the covers in your room. Your mind couldn't help but still be buzzing with thoughts about the future. That was hard not to think about, Ko. There hadn't been enough time to really figure it all out after what happened between you. You felt excited. There was little doubt in your mind that things were moving forward, and you couldn't wait to find out what changes were waiting for you on the horizon. Slowly your eyes grew heavy as you drifted off to sleep, your mind spinning with wishful thoughts. No matter what happened next, you could only hope that you would make the most of it. You were ensnared in a dream when a noise from the outside world jostled you. Your eyes snapped open. Noises happened, you just tried to forget it. Your eyes snapped open. The light clatter continued. Now that you were more alert, You could distinguish it as a tapping sound, quiet, slow, but persistent. Each beat was like being poked. You couldn't ignore it. You lifted your head from the pillow and looked for the source. Not much work was needed to puzzle it out. It was from the window. With that, you knew exactly what it was. From the color of the light filtering in your room, it was too early for anyone to be awake, including the sun. It had barely hauled itself over the horizon, but that didn't stop some people, it seemed. You sat up in bed and opened the window wide. Cool air, not yet warmed by the day, tickled your face as it pushed into your room. And just as you expected, there was your neighbor crouching on your windowsill. He was fully dressed, though not for school. He was wearing a wetsuit and a shy smile. "Hi, Jamie." You stared back, blinking. So technically we won't be back to school for a few more hours?" His voice was delicate, yet deliberate, each word a careful explanation. "Classes haven't actually started yet, so do you want to hit the beach with me one more time this summer?" "Always." His smile widened affectionately. You rushed to get changed into something suitable while Cobb climbed back down to the ground level. Your limbs, still half asleep, struggled somewhat as you attempted to coordinate them into a swimsuit, but you got there in the end. Soon you were tiptoeing out of your front door, clutching a towel. Cobb was already there to greet you. Your eyes met. Cobb's gaze darted to your destination and back to you. You checked the door was closed, gave him a thumbs up, and the two of you leapt into action. Wordlessly, you began to run down the familiar path ahead, Cobb beside you. The thrill of your illicit outing made you want to laugh. Not that you dared. If anyone in your family looked out and saw you, then your summer would be back to being over. One glance at Cobb told you that he was exactly the same, holding back snickers for fear of being heard and caught. The towel streamed out from under your arm like a cape. You were running so fast downhill that simply keeping your balance and not tumbling down was a real threat. It just wasn't enough of one to make you slow your pace. For every step you took, the beach was a little closer and the day a little brighter. What lay ahead for you would arrive, and you were happy to meet it. Since you're romantically interested in Cove and are old enough to start being physically affectionate more seriously, you can choose what initiative level he has throughout Step 3. Making sure the player experiences what they want is important in our life, but always putting your choice first can potentially make a relationship feel one-sided. So we've added some flexibility in how it works out. Low initiative means that Cove will occasionally ask to touch the MC, and in those situations there will always be an opportunity to say yes or no. For example, he won't simply lean over and kiss the MC, main character, as a greeting or in an emotional moment. Every piece of physical interaction will be either initiated or approved by the player before it happens. Middle initiative means there will be those certain times when Cove requests to touch the main character, many chances to initiate affection on your own, and also Cove will pretty regularly give affection automatically. One example would be giving the main character a kiss because he's happy or emotional or something else. And in other situations, you can choose not to make the first move in order to give Cove the space to be the one to act afterwards. Overall, Cove can get romantic, but the player's agency will take priority. High initiative includes everything middle does, but it also means that player agency will be reduced to a degree in favor of having Cove give physical affection even more frequently and with less prompting. Instead of all the major affection giving situations being led by a choice menu for you to decide on, some will instead be replaced by Cove acting automatically. This level is only recommended if you're very comfortable with physical affection and would prefer to simply see it happen rather than always holding the reins on it. However, this level is mostly relevant if Cove ends up as your official boyfriend at some point. Situations where high-level initiative makes a difference tend to come up in scenes that are exclusive to being in a relationship. The parts that are also included in the middle initiative will be seen whether you're dating or not. Once you pick your level, it can't be changed later, so keep your full playthrough in mind when deciding. We hope you enjoy whichever initiative option you decide on. I don't know what this means. Start of classes into the relaxed free days of summer. It didn't take long for you to get back into the swing of the school year routine. Schedules and homework became the new normal. Derek wasn't around nearly as much with school and after-school activities. There weren't many opportunities for him to take the trip out to your neighborhood. Sometimes you'd hear that he was at a training camp or something like that, but you weren't always sure what he was up to. But you still kept in touch over the phone as best you could. The Jeremy kid did disappear after that summer, and no one ever heard from him again. Where he went or what he might be up to was a mystery. More summers came and went like the waves on the shore, coming in and out. In your second year of high school, someone new started to visit Sunset Bird, a sunny girl named Terry Brooke. She was a friend Cove made due to them both being oceans obsessed. Terry was more than glad to befriend you two. Someone close to Cove had to be good company, she felt. You were pleased to get along with her as well. Terry was tight with another girl who you had known distantly from school for a long time, Miranda Eckert. You saw more and more of her as time went on, thanks to Terry and Miranda's own outreach. After a while, all of you developed a real friendship together. As for your home life, the Thompsons also had developments. Changing laws and public perception countrywide made it possible for your moms to openly wear their wedding rings without questions. Though they had a wedding years ago, it was only recently that the union was officially recognized everywhere in the U.S. That was a good day, to say the least. Elizabeth came into her own and stopped being quite as irritable. She no longer worried about perceived childishness as she grew up for real. She didn't even mind being called Lizzie again, although most people used Liz. She eventually graduated high school and moved out to attend college in another state. It was a lot for you to adjust to, your older sister being gone. Liz never let you forget her role in your life, though, and kept in touch. Cole's relationships with his family improved over the years. Kira visited several times after that summer, and things became easier between the two. He was also closer with his dad than ever before. You knew they talked more, and that helped prevent a lot of friction before it could start. However, Cole still wasn't what anyone could call social. He kept to himself. Usually he cared for the few connections he did have, but didn't reach outside them. Cole's interest had shifted from when he was younger. He still enjoyed more studious pursuits, but he also spent just as much time on athletic activities. Things had shifted between you and Cole, but in a way that most couldn't see. After all this time, he wasn't just your neighbor. He wasn't only your friend, or even a guy you were interested in. You were in love with him. You loved Cole. You knew that fact for certain. There was no one else you held those feelings for. It was strange to look back on it all. The future faded into your present, and then it was simply the past. Even the most fundamental parts of your life couldn't last forever. You felt that the most pointedly the day you inevitably graduated high school. It was over and you would not be going back ever again. From now on, what came next was your choice. You would be directing your own life. That was where you were currently. The summer after school, and it had ended. The first summer of true freedom. What used to be a reprieve from the typical was now going to be your first step into adulthood. One fun summer morning, you took in what had become a very special scene, the whole family having a meal together. I gotta save here. Thank you for watching. That has been our life, beginnings and always. Watch for the next episode to come out soon. Thank you for watching. Bye.